stop. You've done the work. You know what you're talking about. You care about this. You have something important to say. It doesn't have to sound like everybody else. If you reach one person in this with your message right now, you've done your job. So just get in there.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Boy, oh boy, do we have an interesting guest today. Helping us get set for sentencing is Professor Heidi K. Brown. First say hello, and then I'll tell everybody who you are and why you're here.
Hello. Very glad to be here. Thank you for
I,
having me.
I'm so grateful for you to be joining us. So I came across Professor Brown, I think really just kind of randomly on social media. And I think your handle on Twitter was the introverted lawyer, and that was a grabber. And I started looking at what Professor Brown is up to, and she's published a lot of books, and she's a public speaker, and she's a professor of legal research and writing, upper level writing at the New York Law School. So she's got to be well versed in story because she's a writer. But the thing that really attracted me was one of the books that I saw the title, and I've got it here for the YouTubes, but of course it's covered up with 1,000 post-it notes. But it's called Untangling Fear in Lawyering. And that was so instantaneously attractive to me because, well, a few reasons. One, I've done a few podcasts that are specifically called a little series called The Fearless Lawyer, and where I profile lawyers who have just gone for it in a case in a criminal sentencing, and just threw caution to the wind or threw fear to the wind, because we have so many fears that create these obstacles, and just went for it and got these amazing results. And so I love to showcase those lawyers, to show people what is possible when we can let go of some of that fear. And so that's what you're going to teach us about today. And then the other thing is clients. I mean, especially in the world and the waters that I swim in criminal sentencing, my job, I think what I try to set me apart from other lawyers is this concept of making empathy the center of my practice, which is to say we have to get out of our own shoes and into the world of our clients and see the world through their eyes. And there's so much fear and uncertainty about what's going to happen to them and what the outcome, what their families are going to go through, what prison is going to be like, what their job prospects are going to be after. Like, fear is everywhere. And I think we lawyers put a little distance between ourselves and that fear, because it's really hard to shoulder that some of that emotional weight. And so I wanted to talk about fear, how we can help our clients. And then I just kind of look at the world, and I see fear as sort of the underlying driver of so much that's wrong in our public discourse and our political life and our everything. So it's just fear, and letting go of fear is my great pastime. I don't think I'm very good at it, but hopefully that's what you're gonna get me through. You're gonna get me through this, and you're gonna help us get set for sentencing today. So welcome, and thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about it. Fear is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. So thank you.
Well, good. And here's another cool little kismet thing we have. This cover of this book, if it wasn't covered up with Post-its, has boxing gloves on it. And before I tell you what my thing with boxing is, explain these boxing gloves on the cover of your book. What's the symbolism?
Oh, I'm so excited you asked this question, because boxing has been a huge part of helping me untangle my fear. First of all, I love the verb untangle. because it's not like all the catchy slogans, just face your fears, just conquer your fears. Like that's so easy, right? Untangling fear, we have to sort of get messy with it and get into the nitty gritty of our fear and then separate potentially helpful things from the harmful things. So I grappled with extreme public speaking anxiety, performance anxiety, and fear throughout my legal career, which I practiced construction law in a hard-hitting, industry like construction law. And even when I started teaching, which is 15 years ago, and the only thing that has helped me actually step into my fear was taking boxing lessons. And it was about 3 years before the pandemic. I walked into my first boxing gym and I admit, I was very intimidated. I was the only woman. I was older than pretty much everybody in there, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I have a very robust blushing response, which you will see on the screen here. But I took my first one-on-one boxing lesson, and the trainer wrapped my hands and put gloves on my hands. I had all the gear, and immediately putting the gear on made me feel cool. But I was afraid, because what happens to me when I experience fear, anxiety, or stress is I go into freeze mode. My fight, flight, freeze starts off as freeze, and I hold my breath. And so what I've learned to do through boxing, I worked with that trainer for 3 years, and then the pandemic hit. I had switched trainers. I trained with a new trainer outside in the pandemic through snow and rain and everything. And what he has taught me, my current trainer has taught me, is how to understand what's happening to my body when I experience fear, and how it causes me to blush, how I hold my breath, how I make myself small. And so through boxing, I've learned how to understand what's happening to me in a fear moment, and pause and realize, wait, I've trained for this. I'm not gonna die in a 90-minute boxing session that is the most intense physical activity I've ever done in my life. I'm not gonna die when I'm called on in a meeting and I'm not sure what to say. Or for me right now, a fear factor a lot of times is in faculty meetings, which is kind of ridiculous on paper. I have 30 years of legal experience, but I sometimes am afraid to articulate thoughts that I haven't fully fleshed out yet, or I'm so afraid of appearing stupid or less intelligent than my peers, which are not grounded in fact fears, but they still happen for me. So the boxing has been such a life changer for me, and that's why it's on the cover of the book. And if you look at the laces of the boxing gloves on the cover are tangled, and so it's kind of the theme of, okay, let's untangle the fears that we all experience.
Okay, yeah, I do see that. And then I notice, like, not necessarily between chapters, but just between sections within chapters, there's little boxing gloves everywhere you look. So
Yes.
I love
I like
it.
that you noticed that, because I really pushed hard for my publisher to put that in there, and they're like, nah, no one's going to notice that. No, we have to have the
Oh, I
boxing.
definitely notice that. It's such an it's such a appropriate sort of connection, because I mean, we're in the arena. We're fighters. And the idea of getting physically prepared, like we're lawyers, we over prepare with, make sure we have all our case sites and, and we're, whatever, but we don't give a lot of attention to physically preparing for those moments of extreme stressful interaction.
No, we don't. And through studying fear, I learned a term called somatic intelligence. Like, we're so focused on our intellectual intelligence, right? And we all have heard about emotional intelligence. But in studying myself during boxing, but also in the research I did for the fear book, I learned about somatic intelligence. And that's understanding how our physical bodies react to fear, anxiety, stress, a perceived threat. Our bodies don't know the difference between, a threat, like if you're swimming in the ocean and you see an ominous shadow, or you're on a plane and you feel that really rough turbulence. Our bodies immediately react. Usually, our bodies don't know the difference between that kind of physical threat to our safety versus a stressful court appearance, or a negotiation, or an encounter with a client who maybe doesn't want to hear what we're about to tell them. So our bodies can react the same way.
Yeah.
But if we become somatically intelligent, I mean, it's taken me a long time to be able to notice in the moment, oh, okay, my heart's racing again. I can feel my face heating up. I realize I'm caving my shoulders forward. And I've learned how to be somatically intelligent and catch myself faster in that moment, stop that downward spiral, and instead recalibrate physically. So then my intellectual intelligence, my intellectual preparation can shine. But for me, the physical reaction always held me back from doing my best work. But if
Mm.
we become somatically intelligent, we can let our other forms of intelligence really shine much greater than if we hadn't done that somatic
I
research.
love that. I love that. I'm having flashbacks to law school when you talk about the shark in the water or whatever that fear. For me, it was the blue book when it was time to sit down to take that final exam. And of course, in law school, I'm sure you had the same deal. It was one test at the end of the entire semester, so everything is riding on. And I would look at the blue book, and it would be a bunch of empty pages that I know I would have to fill, and I would see everything, my whole future in those empty pages. What if I blow this test? What if I don't get the grade? What if? But the good news is this, and I think it's relevant, but you know, I think I was going through a phase in law school where I was starting to get into like Tai Chi and a little bit of
Mm.
meditation and stuff. So I did this thing right before the exam buzzer starts to start writing that blue book, where I would close my eyes and I would take a lot of deep, deep breaths and just in and out. And my classmates would look at me like, "What the fuck is up with this guy?" Like, but I felt like just preparing myself for 30 seconds or a minute, doing that, focusing, breathing intensely, and getting centered. And then I would just go at it. And no, I didn't ace every single one of my tests, but I think it helped. I think there was really something to that physical, spiritual preparation.
I'm so glad you said that. I was literally meeting with a student yesterday he's a first year law student, and he's experiencing an extreme form of anxiety that he has never experienced before. And he's had a couple midterms. Now law schools have started to some law schools have done what they call formative assessment, where they will give a midterm instead of the all or nothing stakes of one final exam. Not everybody does that. But this student was entering into these exams, and he said it took him 10 minutes to calm down, and he felt like he was so behind. Everybody else was furiously typing on their laptops, etc. And I actually said to him, kind of to your point, what if you did take 3 to 5 minutes, maybe not the full 10 if you feel like that's too much, but what if you said, no, I'm going to treat myself like an athlete or a performer, and part of my ritual and stepping into this performance arena of a law school exam is going to be I take 3 to 5 minutes and calm myself down. And it hadn't occurred to him that that was okay. And I feel like he and I could work on time management so he could make up that time on the test. But I think what you modeled in law school is genius. I think we all should do that before every major performance. Just like many athletes and performers have those kind of rituals too, and it helps.
Yeah, it's carried over. Like if I'm in the court, if I'm having a court appearance, especially in federal court, they have these little rooms, these little side pocket rooms right outside of chambers where lawyers can go and prepare and everything else. And no one's ever in them, and they're dark and they're quiet and they're cool. And I'll go in there for a second and just chill for a second and then go in and do that. So, what about for a client? Do you think could we help our clients get in that same groove?
I absolutely think we can. I think we have to be overt and express about it and explain why we're doing it, and talk about some of this somatic stuff. For me, because when the anxiety starts kicking in, my heart starts beating really fast, and I feel like all my adrenaline or energy is bouncing around inside me like a pinball.
Yeah.
And then all the mental stuff, my negative mental soundtrack starts coming in. So I think if we explain to clients, hey, first you might feel some physical sensations of this fear. Let's talk about that. Where does that manifest for you in your body? And some clients might feel like that's a little too touchy-feely, but I think if we talk about how it affects us and how we manage our own. I mean, I like to do the power pose. I don't know if you're familiar with Amy Cuddy. She did
I
an
know.
amazing TED talk on power poses. And she got a little bit of criticism and controversy because her scientific studies, I don't think, were able to be replicated, but I still do what she taught in that TED talk, which is standing in whatever pose feels physically powerful to you for 3 minutes before you step into an arena. And so for me, in addition to just because I'm an introvert, I got to get away from people before I go do a big presentation. But I stand, and it used to be like the superwoman pose. But lately I've been doing this. I'm going to do it on screen since this is live, a starfish pose. And for me, that's a way of just recalibrating and recentering, but also feeling powerful. I think if we get our clients doing that, comfortable doing that, maybe in the privacy of your office first, et cetera, but noticing whether that has an effect on them, and then kind of rewriting the mental soundtrack too. You kind of mentioned, the exams were I use the phrase all or nothing. And I think a lot of times I have built up situations to be like the Super Bowl halftime show, and they really weren't that important. Now I know your clients are dealing with some high stakes, situations, obviously, but if there's a way to reframe each maybe incremental step in their procedural journey so they can handle it a little better by combining that physical recalibration and maybe rewriting the mental soundtrack a bit, that might help.
You sound like a professor I wish I would have had when I went to law school, which isn't to say I loved every minute, really. I mean, I had a great time with my amazing professors, but nobody was talking about any of that stuff.
No.
And even worse, it really seems, and you talk about this in your book too, I think, but it almost seems like law school is designed to terrify you, as if that is this forged in fire training that we must have as lawyers so that we can power through the fear.
I agree. That still is somewhat of the approach. And I think that, and because I get into debates all the time with my esteemed colleagues at various institutions about this, and they push back on some of my approaches and say, well, we can't reduce the rigor of the profession. This is supposed to be a rigorous profession. And I say, yes, it absolutely is. But I think what a lot of times we do in law school is we skip over the training part, and we sort of throw these law students into the fire without modeling first what a Socratic dialogue looks like. Modeling how do you stay in a conversation when you've absolutely done the presentation, done the preparation, you've done the work, but you're nervous. How do we help students stay in that conversation instead of making them think they either have to be good at it or they're out on day one of law school? There definitely is, I think, also somewhat of an extrovert bias in law school. So the students who are perfectly comfortable speaking tend to dominate classroom dialogue, but often, I'm not trying to disrespect those students, but a lot of times the students who are really ready to speak in class haven't always thought through the answer, but it looks like they are more competent or more engaged, whereas the quiet, maybe more nervous student probably has the answer right there in his or their notes, but just needs that practice and needs that modeling on how to amplify their voices more authentically. I think that would be a more humane approach to including everybody in a classroom discussion, but it takes time to do that. And a lot of law professors think they don't have enough time to cover all the substance, but I think we can balance both.
Yeah. Or recognize that we're here to, I guess, to some degree, to terrify you, to make sure you're forged and steeled and ready to do battle. But let's give you a set of tools for how to manage all that stress and anxiety at the same time. I have my main rap that I'm always talking about at law school. It has to do with my passion for storytelling, which is to say that's another thing. I hope that it changes, and I see it making in some corners of the academic legal world, it is changing, but we're really focused on the law, the facts, issue, rule, application, conclusion, and the humanity of it. The story side gets completely lost. We read these cases and these steel girders are falling on people and crushing their skulls, and we go right to what's the legal issue here, and forget that there's a human being who just had their skull crushed, or who's debilitated for the rest of their life.
Right. No,
Um,
absolutely. I'm teaching persuasion in my writing class right now, and we're spending a lot of time, talking about Aristotle's three modes of persuasion: logos, ethos, and pathos.
Pathos,
And
yeah.
pathos is the storytelling. It's the emotion. But I wanted to, one thing you just said, maybe bring it back to boxing again. I can bring any
Good.
conversation back to
Oh,
boxing
good.
or the band U2. um, but boxing right now. What my trainer Lou, his name is Lou, tells me is that actually the best fighters are. You don't need to be an extremely aggressive and hardcore and determined to just beat someone to be a great fighter. He said actually a great fighter is one who treats, it's called the sweet science. Boxing is the sweet science, and you have to be patient and pay attention and notice and watch the other person's rhythm and watch their foot movement, and little subtle movements of like a shoulder can tell you where they're going to throw their punch. So he's teaching me all of that, not to just get in there and brawl, which I think is such a great analogy for lawyering, that
Mm,
really sometimes it's better for us to be quiet, be patient. Being patient in boxing helps me get control of my breathing again, because when I try to be all aggressive and throw the hardest punches I can as fast as I can, I can't breathe. So it all kind of comes together if you think about lawyers that way too, that we should slow down a little bit, pay attention, see what the story is. Don't be so quick to react, and jump into the fray. Be a little
yeah.
observe.
Yeah. I think a lot of lawyers do this. If I just throw as many punches as I can, fast and furious, I'll scare the other person into submission. But it's the sweet science. That's very cool. And this is a good part for me to talk about my connection to boxing.
Yeah.
Usually, well, so I'm happy to do it. A lot of times in the podcast, I try to relate something to tequila because that's another passion of mine.
I love
Um,
that. I love tequila.
but oh well, good. We'll have to talk about that. But
I like mezcal. Is that
oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't gotten full into mezcal yet, but I'm working my way there. But the only connection I found to tequila thus far was a short little thing in your book when you were talking about your time as the do you remember this? Is as in the construction law, and one of the partners went off on
oh
you and said
yeah.
something like, "You're always rushing through the halls. You haven't made any effort to assimilate. You never stay late to drink tequila with us!" Exclamation point. And you need to make your job this number one priority. It's not my number one priority, I murmured. I worked at a big firm for a couple of years. Nobody drank tequila. I
It
was
was
working at the wrong firm, clearly.
no. I mean, this was a pretty intense dynamic. So we were very much expected to work hard and play hard, and I was going through a really rough time in my life. I could barely hold it together. So that's why I ended up telling him that that job was not my number one priority. I was that
Well,
I
I don't
needed
think a
to.
job should ever be a number
I know.
one priority.
I know.
But anyway, so we're not going to do tequila, but I will show you what I have here.
Okay. Oh, I love it.
For the people who aren't watching this in the YouTube, I have this pair of Everlast boxing gloves, which I've written some blog. One of my blogs has these red boxing gloves on it because it's referring to, because I'm the story guy. So it's Rocky is one of my favorite movies of all
Oh,
time.
yes.
And I think we as lawyers have a lot to learn from Rocky. But anyway, these gloves, you can't see it, but they're autographed by none other than Iron Mike Tyson.
Oh my gosh. He's my
Yes,
favorite fighter. He's my
he's
favorite fighter.
he's the
Yes.
man.
He's
And
so the man.
each of these has his signature, but this one says to Doug, and then one just says
Oh my
Mike
goodness.
Tyson.
And I just
Uh,
love the way Mike Tyson now, I mean, obviously he has been through a lot in his life, and he's the first to admit he's made a ton of mistakes.
yeah,
I read his memoir. I follow him on Instagram. He is such an amazing human being now, with all the charity work that he does and his hilarious podcast, and he's just really funny, and I like him.
I love it. I love him. I love him too. I was just watching a TikTok today. It came off randomly across my thing, and it's a video of Mike Tyson. He's doing some skit where he's doing an unboxing of a strawberry shortcake doll, and he's like combing her hair and stuff. It's hilarious. But
That's
have you
so
seen
funny.
have you seen his Broadway the show he did, the live stage show he did?
No, but my trainer Lou was just telling me about his one man show. He's actually going to be at the Beacon though. He's going to do I think a panel discussion at the Beacon. I forget what it's called,
Okay. There's
but
also a really cool Hulu short series on Tyson
okay.
that's based on that show, but it's his whole life story. But they use the show as the vehicle for storytelling. But
All my
Yeah.
boxing t-shirts have Tyson on them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, he's something. So one of the things that really jumped out at me like a wow moment is the connection between fear and creativity.
Hmm.
And you talk about this connection. And I'm going to read a quote, but then I want you to tell me about this connection here. But the quote was amazing. And it's from Twyla Tharp.
Oh yes.
Um, you also quote Pressfield, and I've read that book, the art of the War of Art, which is an
Yeah.
incredible book.
Amazing. So
Uh,
inspiring. And his logo is boxing gloves, by the way.
I didn't know that,
Mhm.
but that's another great overlap that we have. That book, I've read that book. I've listened to him on Audible like 2 or 3 times, and I'll listen to it 3 or 4 more to just. But anyway, this is from Twyla Tharp. She says creativity is an act of defiance. You're challenging the status quo. You're questioning accepted truths and principles. As lawyers and legal writers, we can use creativity to rock the proverbial boat.
Right. That last part was me. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That exactly. The end
That was
quote
my
as truth.
reaction to
Question
Twyla.
after
Brilliance.
Twyla
Yeah.
was after questioning accepted truths and principles, and you say, yeah, as lawyers and legal writers, we use this to rock the proverbial boat.
Yes.
And nothing is more true in my legal life and with the sentencing videos and the approach that I've been taking to the law. But tell me about the connection between fear and creativity.
I think fear is what has driven me really to dive deep into what fuels me as a creative person, because I think what we're most afraid of is probably the most important thing that we need to write or create about, especially when it comes to art. I mean, I think all of this is relevant to lawyering. For me, I love to write. Writing has been, I really have four well-being pillars, and we've talked about most of them already. It's writing, boxing, the band U2, obviously, and travel. And all those things for me have involved fear. And so writing for me is the creative act. But I was always, I think, until I went through that rough traumatic time that I mentioned and I was working at that firm, I hadn't allowed myself to write about psychology issues or personal narrative. And I discovered Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. So I think Julia Cameron's book, Twyla Tharp's book, The Creative Habit, and all of Stephen Pressfield's books have been the most formative influences on me as a writer. And when I discovered Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, she has this practice called morning pages. And it's basically just 3 pages of journaling every morning, not 4 pages, not two, exactly three. And in those 3 pages, that creative act of just pouring, and it's handwritten. I like pens and paper. I have cool journals that I buy myself. All these fears just poured out. And through, so creativity helped me process my fear. And then untangling my fear turned me into a much more creative person. And as you know, as a writer, as a legal writer, as an academic writer, I'm subject to a lot of critique and a lot of criticism. I mean, I've had some pretty harsh criticism about my work, especially the stuff that I write about in these books. And I just it's empowered me. I feel like I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid anymore to use my creativity to get these messages out there, because I wish somebody had done that for me when I was going through. I've said, and like I write in my books, I dealt with extreme public speaking anxiety, extreme performance anxiety, a ton of fear, but I was never allowed to talk about it, or I didn't feel comfortable talking about it. And so I feel like having done the work to untangle my fear, it's opened the floodgates to different modes of creativity and to take risks, creative risks. and make mistakes. And sometimes I write something that's totally stupid. um, when you get that one email from a student in a different state, or that a lawyer, sometimes in a foreign country, who writes and says, hey, thank you for saying that, spelling out that fear, because I didn't know what to call it. So in a roundabout way, I think that creativity can help us unearth and untangle fears. And at the same time, when we really face down our fears and understand them, we can rip open our ability to be incredibly creative storytellers.
Well, I love that. And I think your whole body of work is emblematic of that. The reason you're getting criticism is because you're breaking the mold of what I think most legal writing is supposed to look like. This idea that you're just going to write treatises and you're going to dissect cases and you're going to do this or whatever. And you say, no, I'm going to let us sort of sit and stare in the face what we all know to be true and that we're afraid to talk about. We're introverts. We have fear. We have wellness issues. We're not taking care of ourselves the way we should. And this is probably a good point to say that. So we're talking about one book. You've got a few, but the one we're talking about, again, Untangling Fear and Lawyering, a 4-step journey towards powerful advocacy. But I think that's number 2 of the first is the introverted lawyer, a 7-step journey toward authentically empowered advocacy, and the flourishing lawyer. I think that's behind you right there. The
This one has
flourishing
the
lawyer,
red boxing gloves on it.
but it looks kind of like a heart too. I'm sure that's
It does.
intentional.
That was
Yeah.
intentional in the EKG line. Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, good. Yeah. So the flourishing lawyer, a multi-dimensional approach to performance and well-being. So we're probably going to have you back for a whole other podcast on well-being and wellness,
I would love
because that's been a big, not a focus of mine, but a sort of a recognition that we're so bad at that. We are so bad at placing a premium on self-care in what's one of the most stressful occupations in the history of occupations, I think. I mean, it's up there. I mean, there's a reason why the rate of suicides and substance abuse and divorces and depression and heart attacks and there's not a lawyer listening to this podcast who doesn't know somebody who hasn't made it in this lifetime, right?
This is
So
why I like the athlete or performer analogy for us as lawyers, because I think sometimes our profession shies away from talking about the wellness and mental health topics is because it feels weak, which it isn't. But I think that's the perception, is that, oh, we're tough, we're supposed to be smart, we're supposed to be, only care about the logic, like all the things you were saying earlier. But I think if we can flip that upside down and treat ourselves like athletes or performers, because the athlete model doesn't work for everybody, but think about your favorite singer or dancer or perform some other mode of performing other than being an athlete. They don't just focus on the one skill that brings them glory on the field or on the stage. Like we shouldn't just focus on our intellect. And athletes and performers, in the Flourishing Lawyer book, I talk about 10 different dimensions that athletes and performers can focus on, and we can too. And it's not just our intellect. It's like our social well-being. It's our even our spiritual well-being, whatever that means to us. I mean, I was raised by a minister, so I kind of resist all the word spiritual, but what that really means is having meaning and purpose in our jobs. It doesn't mean what that word might be taken to mean. It just means, thinking of something that's bigger than ourselves.
yeah,
A lot of times we don't take time to think about that.
right.
So in that book, I took the 6 dimensions that the National Task Force on Lawyer Wellbeing identified in 2017, and then I added 4 more. And it's funny you brought up creativity, because a creative dimension, our creative or artistic dimension, is one of those 4 that I added. Because I think as lawyers, if we were just, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but if we could make an effort to tend to our creativity, we would solve complex legal problems in non-complex legal ways. And I think that that's something that would be just amazing for us to explore more in law school, but also for us as high achieving attorneys. Just give ourselves permission to get creative and artistic again, like we were in high school or in elementary school.
My mind's on fire now because earlier today I had a meeting with my accountant. We were talking about what is and is not tax deductible. And now I'm thinking, wait a minute, creative art lessons, say recording your own record,
Mhm.
taking up painting. This is all professional development. You've just given everyone a tax write-off because you're saying it's going to make us better lawyers.
It is. There's
No,
science behind
for the record, I'm not giving tax or accounting advice. Consult with your own
it.
accountants,
And I'm
but
not giving
there's
psychology or medical
there's a
advice, but
science behind.
there are scientific studies that link creativity to well-being and our artistic and creative pursuits to well-being. I think that could even be something to explore with your clients, to be honest with you.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I've thought about it. I don't think I'm trying to think if I've actually done that, but one of the things, I have a really good friend and I play music with him. He's a phenomenal lawyer too. He's a death penalty attorney. Hi, Ken Murray, if you're listening. But he writes songs. We both write songs. We play music, like I said, and we have just thought for so long if we could go in and write songs with our clients to tell,
Yes.
and I think they do. I know they do this in other areas, like for vets who are coming back with
Mhm.
PTSD, story to song. I know some people that do that, but that idea of having them creative, giving them a creative outlet for their story and their trauma, would
Absolutely.
open them up in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. We just haven't figured out how to, it's most of the jails aren't going to let us stroll in there with a guitar, but some recording equipment. But I'd love to figure out a way to make that
Yeah.
happen. I think it'd be huge. It'd be so
There
cool.
are programs. Well, we can talk offline, but I have
Yeah.
some people I can connect you with on that front.
That
And
work with clients, that
really,
work with inmates and stuff.
yes, yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, good. Well, awesome. So, okay. So let's see. I want to make sure I got the 4 steps right because you mentioned U2 and boxing, but you said you have a 4-step process to untangling fear, and I have a feeling it's not U2 and boxing and everything else, or is it? No,
No, those are
that's your
that's
process.
kind of part of step 4 and how I
Okay.
cultivate. So the first step for me was something I called comparative fearlessness. And I encourage other people to do this. It's figuring out situations in your life in which you are not afraid, in which you actually feel like the strongest, toughest, most fearless person in the room or in wherever you are. And then comparing that with a situation where, well, first of all, that situation by society standards, maybe you should be afraid, but you're totally not. And then comparing that with a scenario where by society standards, you should not be afraid, but you are. And then try to discern the difference. So for me, the boxing was an example of a situation that I put myself in constantly that my parents and my friends were like, why are you doing that? That is scary and dangerous. Do not go get hit in the head, But now that I have this trainer and I have the right headgear and I've got the mouth guard, I can step into a boxing ring and I'm not afraid. I might be a little hyped up, but I'm not afraid. Same thing with travel for me. So I am not afraid to get on a plane and go to a foreign country by myself have to figure everything out alone, like the foreign currency. I like to speak different languages or learn different languages. Things don't always go right, but I don't tend to be afraid. Whereas my parents, who live kind of a conservative lifestyle, they and my friends are like, why are you going there alone? Don't you want someone with you, or aren't you afraid something's going to happen? I'm just not. I trust myself and I've built up levels of trust so I don't experience that fear. But like I mentioned earlier, even with 20 years of litigation experience and 15 years of law teaching, overlapping 5 of those years of practice, I should not be afraid to speak at a law school faculty meeting, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. But because of my job at the last law school where I taught for 7 years, I had a job that involved a lot of controversial policy decisions. And I had some detractors. And every time I knew I was going to have to speak at a faculty meeting, my face turned beet red, my heart was racing. It was all that fear stuff again. And to me, that made no sense. So the comparative fearlessness, step 1, is looking at those two or three scenarios and realizing that for me, the fear comes down to a fear of judgment and criticism. That's just my particular fear. Other people might have other fears, fear of mistakes, fear of losing money, fear of, there's all kinds of fears we can have. Mine, when I peel back all the layers, is really about being ashamed. It's about being rejected. It's about being excluded. It's about being abandoned. And that might sound kind of touchy-feely for a lawyer, but that's like my fear of speaking at a faculty meeting can take me right back to that place. Rejection, exclusion, being deemed not worthy of the job, etc. It's really that dramatic. In like 30 seconds, I can take myself to that place. So that gives us a lot of information though, right?
And can I jump in because I feel like so you're recognizing what those emotions are about, and fear and shame and abandonment and but there's probably a deeper element that is worth putting a sort of a pin in, which is there's a reason why you're afraid of those particular things. I'm not here to psychoanalyze you, and we don't have to go into it, but I know from my own experience, because I feel the same way. And I've done a fair amount of work about why those feelings are based in, and they're based in shit that happened when I was a little kid. And so if you can go not just recognize how you're feeling, but then take it a little further and do some work to figure out where those feelings come from, because they're different for everybody. It's probably an added layer of authenticity and of efficacy for this
100%
process, would you say? Yeah.
100%
Okay.
yes. And that kind of feeds into the next two steps.
Oh,
So
good. Okay.
hold that thought for 1 second, because I want to talk about the physical first. Because the physical, I feel the physical symptoms before all that mental stuff starts turning around. I feel the fear, like when I anticipate a stressful event or scary event, or when I'm stepping into it, I feel it. And so step two in my process is to pay attention when we're practicing and learning this stuff. Pay attention to exactly what happens to your physical body and in what chronological order, and write it down. So for me, again, it's the heart races, my face heats up, I turn red. And then after that, though, my shoulders cave in. I tend to cross my arms and legs. If I'm sitting down, I'm like trying to get as small as possible. Because my reaction, my fight, flight, freeze is I freeze and I go into protective mode, which my boxing trainer has taught me, you can't sit there and cower down. Like you gotta get, but it's different for everybody. So step two is realizing the physical response, but then working on a physical reset. So when I notice that that's happening, because it still happens all the time, it's not that we're going to undo decades of programming overnight. But so for me, I still have that physical reaction, but I notice it a lot faster. And so for me, then I have to reset, stand in my power pose, or sit in if I'm in a meeting, I can't exactly stand up and do the starfish, but I can do a power pose, like a superhero pose while I'm sitting down, which forces my shoulders back. I open up my arms and I get that breathing and oxygen and energy flowing in a productive manner. I also, for my epic blushers out there, I read this amazing book by this woman, Erica Hilliard, who wrote a book. The book is called Living Fully with Shyness and Social Anxiety. And it's the first time I've ever read anything helpful about blushing. She wrote, "A blush is life coursing through you." It's basically like life is leaving little footprints. And so when I read that, I thought, oh, wow, yay, I'm alive. And so now when I blush, at first I'll have that knee jerk, oh, great, everyone's going to look at me or make fun of me or whatever. But then I think, oh, no, wait, it's just life coursing through me. I'm alive. Yay, me. And then I totally forget about it and it goes away faster. It doesn't go away immediately. But so the second step is the physical, but the third step is what you're talking about. It's the mental.
Yeah.
So again, the work we need to do is to pay attention to the mental soundtrack that accompanies the negative physical stuff. So for me, it's all that. It's like my fifth grade science teacher who I remember certain things that happened in that class, and then a lot of stuff with my parents, my family, etc. And the messages that I'm telling myself are you're going to turn red. Everyone's going to make fun of you. You're not that smart. You can't articulate yourself as well as everybody else in this room, etc. What are you even doing here? Why do you say yes to these things? You know, not helpful. So, but it all starts trickling out again. And so then I have to say internally, or sometimes I'll write it down, stop. You've done the work. You know what you're talking about. You care about this. You have something important to say. It doesn't have to sound like everybody else. If you reach one person in this with your message right now, you've done your job. So just get in there. And just by repeating that thing to myself, it's a mental reset, because to your point, all the stuff that contributed to my negative mental soundtrack happened decades ago.
Yeah.
Decades ago. So why am I inviting my 5th grade science teacher into a deposition with me, or the courtroom, or my faculty meetings? Like, hope she's doing great, but she's not in my life. So why am I bringing her and my parents, who are, fundamentally good people, but we've been through a lot, right? Why am I bringing all of that past into the present when it's irrelevant to my current role and then the goals I've set for myself? Obviously, a lot of us, myself included, have trauma that we need to process more deeply, that gets triggered in other ways. Something even happened to me recently where I was like, okay, I gotta go back to therapy.
Yeah.
Because even doing all this work, it's not a perfect solution. But in terms of what we're talking about, I think it's a huge start. So step 1 is the comparative fearlessness. Step 2 is the physical. Step 3 is the mental. And then step 4 for me is kind of cultivating a culture of what I call in the book fortitude. And that's layering all these daily or weekly activities that help me stay on track. And that's the morning pages journaling. It's the boxing. It's going to be different for everybody, but treating ourselves like an athlete or a performer, and having daily and then definitely weekly rituals that help keep you on track. So when you hit those moments, you remember you've done the work.
Amazing. Amazing. There's so many thoughts that pop into my head when you go through those 4 things. I've worked with trauma therapists in work, and I've, had my own experience in life, and they do this thing you're talking about, which is, where are you feeling this? Like, when you're talking, what are you feeling? Where in your body are you experiencing this? And when I was first asked that question, I was kind of like, fuck are you talking about? But, yeah, I have a pit in my stomach, or my heart I feel it in my heart, or maybe my head's pounding. I don't know, but just to be that self-aware and self-conscious about it, that's amazing, man. And the physicality, because when you talk about it in terms of getting yourself right and centering and grounding yourself, but it just strikes me about how important body language is when you're in the arena. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I have a client and they're terrified and they're doing that, making themselves as small as possible, and so what? Their arms are crossed or folded. What does that communicate to the judge? The judge
Right.
may say they're defiant, they're angry, they don't care. They're going to read into that. If you could take, this is just a brand new epiphany that you've given me, but to get your client in the right body language is not just to get them mentally prepared, it's to show the audience who you are in your essence, in your core, and not have any miscommunication about what you really think about the situation.
Yeah. And if we can communicate that to the clients and also the judges, because I feel like I feel like my whole life I was kind of shamed for blushing, and also my reaction to fear, but nobody ever said, hey, you're having an authentic reaction. So I think we can validate your clients that they are scared, and okay, acknowledge that, but then recalibrate, because you want to project that you actually deep down are a really wonderful human being, or accept, however you want to phrase who they really are at their essence.
Yeah.
And then also, I feel like somebody's got to do some research on and there's a law professor named Susan Bandis who writes about emotion, I think in sentencing. I'll have to look it up for you. But I was talking to her about the blushing thing, because I blush and when I haven't even done anything. Someone could ask me a question about like sea salt and I will blush for no reason. because I'm thinking about something that happened in the past. So I always have wondered if clients who have facial responses like sweating or blushing, if it has a negative effect on sentencing or how they're perceived in the courtroom when it's totally misplaced or mistimed. It's not even a reaction to what's happening to them in the moment. It could be something that you're thinking about that happened 5 years ago.
Yeah,
So I keep that in mind too. But I'll
I
see if I
love
can
it.
dig research on that.
All right. So I think we're getting close to the end. I'm sad we're getting close to the end, but I think I'm going to set this up and ask you about the way that we talk about fear and the way that we message fear. And I think because I was reading, well, I just had this conversation, I swear to you, on Saturday with a lawyer friend, really esteemed lawyer, like top of his game lawyer. And he was talking about how he still to this day is overcome with fear and anxiety when either set foot in a courtroom or he teaches lawyers all over the country. And he says, every time I'm getting ready, I think I'm going to look like an idiot or they're not going to understand what I'm saying. And it's his whole process, even though he's been doing this for 30 years. And these are the things that you say, things lawyers shouldn't be afraid of, and there are things they should. But I said to him, my friend, I won't name his name, but he's probably listening and he knows who he is because I was just with him this weekend. But I said, well, that's what makes you good. I said, because there's so many lawyers who have such an inflated sense of self-worth and they're really idiots. And either they're bloviating and putting on airs just to hide from the world what they know to be true, which is, I don't know what I'm talking about, or they're just so oblivious to their own ignorance that they're blissfully making their way through the world without fear because they can do no wrong. And I said, the fact that you have so much anxiety, but you're so good at what you do tells me that you care and that, it matters, because if it didn't, you just phone it in. You go, I'm not going to over prepare for this. And, maybe you wouldn't do such a good job if you weren't that stressed and you didn't have that much anxiety. So I was kind of trying to tell him, fear's good. It's a good motivator in that sense. But then I read your book and I had a feeling that Professor Heidi K. Brown would probably want to phrase that in a different way.
I think it's very awesome that you are a good friend to your friend in that way. And so I won't say but I'll say and. I was told my whole life, fear is a great motivator. If the day you stop being afraid, you should quit the law. And I thought, oh, that's just for people like me with debilitating fear. That was not a helpful message for me. I think that's a good helpful message for some people whose fear, they just need to just keep doing it, and by practicing, eventually the fear goes away. What I'm talking about is different. And I don't know if your friend is more like me in that we can tell ourselves all day long it means we care, it means we're good at our jobs, but that still doesn't help us get through that 10, 15 minutes or 30 minutes or however long of that intense, sometimes painful physical reactions to the fear. So what I would say is that's where the untangling comes in, because I do think there's some parts of fear that motivate us, but we got to discern what are those parts from the stuff, maybe the mental messages that are really not helpful. And so I agree that I love that your friend does care and that it matters to him, and that's probably what motivates him to do a great job. But I think with some of these practices and layering and experimenting with different techniques, he'll find a ritual or a routine like an athlete or performer that will help dial down the intensity of it a little bit. That's what I've been able to do for myself. Like the fear doesn't go away. And I guess, kind of to your point, that's because I care and I want to do a good job. But I've been able to dial down the fear of the judgment a lot more because I will do my morning pages journaling. I'll do the boxing, or I'll run on the days I don't box. I play a really loud song. I'll give you 3 guesses on which band before I step into a big performance. And I have like certain jewelry even that I'll wear just as a reminder, a physical reminder that I've done the work to step into the arena. And then also, I just have loved embracing imperfection. I think perfection is really boring. And so I think it doesn't have to go perfectly every time. And if he can experiment with some of those techniques, maybe just he'll be able to dial down the intensity a bit so he can enjoy the rush of those moments.
Easier said than done, but it's amazing advice. We're just such a tense breed, these lawyers, like high performing, high stress people, but it's so important what you're doing, and I'm so grateful that you're out there. Where can we well, Untangling Fear in Lawyering I got on Amazon, so I know all your books are going to be available on Amazon and all the usual spots, but where else could we find you if we wanted to pick up what you're putting down?
Absolutely. I have
In
a
the
website.
boxing ring or at a U2 concert. But besides that,
I have a website called theflourishinglawyer.org, and that has a lot of the resources that I've mentioned on this podcast. It also has links to all the books. I love hearing from people on social media. I'm on LinkedIn as, I think it's either Heidi Kristen Brown or it might be the Introverted Lawyer book, but both you'll find me on LinkedIn. And then I'm a big fan of Instagram, where you will see all of my boxing and YouTube adventures. And that on Instagram, I'm Introverted Lawyer, and Twitter, it's Introvert Lawyer. So
awesome. I'll
yes,
put all those links in the show notes and links to your books as well. Professor Brown, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me for an hour on Set for Sentencing. I think that lawyers, you got a whole bunch of great advice, not just for your own well-being, but to help your clients overcome fear. So double whammy, which we don't get all the time on Set for Sentencing, bonus points. And I hope I bump into you at the Sphere at one of the U2 shows, because
yes,
I might have to do that.
you will. I'll be down on the floor with my hands in the air, jumping up and down, probably crying.
Okay, good. All right, Professor Brown, thank you so much. I will talk with you soon, I hope.
Hopefully, yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I could have talked to you for 6 hours.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign up on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.